The boardroom glittered like a temple of wealth, every polished surface and gleaming chandelier designed to remind those within who truly ruled. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the chrome trim of the long mahogany table and scattering fragments of light across the glass walls. At its head sat William Harrington, a man carved out of stone and ambition. His custom-tailored suit was sharper than the eyes of the 20 executives who sat before him, all too terrified to meet his gaze for more than a heartbeat. His voice, smooth but cold, cut through the air like the sound of a blade being unsheathed. "Compassion," Harrington sneered, savoring the word as though it were something distasteful. "Do you know what compassion buys you? Weakness, failure, bankruptcy." His laughter followed, a hollow metallic echo that filled the boardroom and made grown men shrink in their leather chairs. A junior executive, pale and sweating, had just finished stammering out a proposal to reduce layoffs in a struggling division, an appeal born of conscience, not profit. Harrington leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locking onto the unfortunate man. "You want to keep the dead weight?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. "Perhaps you'd like to write the losses from your own paycheck, Or better yet, move into their homes and hold their hands while they sob about mortgages." The room erupted in nervous chuckles, a chorus of forced laughter meant to appease the king and his court. The young executive's face burned crimson as he sank into his chair, silenced not by argument but by the sheer force of Harrington's derision. Around the table, pens scratched hurried notes, though no one would dare question the verdict that had already been passed. William Harrington leaned back, folding his hands with satisfaction. This was how it always went. He commanded, other. Disobeyed. He mocked, they laughed. He crushed, they bled. In his world, power wasn't negotiated. It was taken and enforced. Money was his language, and fear was the accent that made it unmistakable. The air in the boardroom grew heavy, stifling, as if the room itself conspired to keep everyone silent. Each executive avoided eye contact, their gazes glued to their laptops or notepads, desperate not to draw his attention. Harrington thrived in that silence. It was proof of his supremacy. And then the door opened. The sound was small, just a hinge creaking against polished steel, but it was enough to slice through the suffocating quiet like a sudden bell in a cathedral. Every head turned toward the source. The security guard stationed outside hadn't moved quickly enough. Into the boardroom stepped a figure so out of place it seemed the world itself had shifted off balance. A child. She couldn't have been more than 7. A faded blue dress hung awkwardly from her slight frame, and scuffed shoes clicked softly against the marble floor. In one hand, she clutched a battered notebook, its pages bulging from overuse. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, but it was her eyes, deep brown, steady, fearless, that froze the room more effectively than any of Harrington's tirades ever had. She didn't speak, not yet. She simply stood there in the doorway, tiny against the vast expanse of the boardroom, yet somehow commanding attention that even Harrington himself struggled to reclaim. For the first time in years, the great William Harrington felt his grip on the room slip, the balance of power unsettled not by a rival tycoon or a hostile takeover, but by a poor little girl who had just walked into his fortress of glass and steel. The executives glanced between the child and their leader, waiting, breathless, for his response. Harrington's lips parted, but no words came. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the armor of arrogance, something unfamiliar stirred an unease he hadn't felt in decades. The silence thickened, and in that silence the girl took one quiet step forward. The silence after her entrance stretched like glass ready to shatter. William Harrington's fingers drummed once against the polished mahogany, his steel blue eyes narrowing. In 48 years, no one had dared walk uninvited into his sanctum, much less a child who looked like she belonged anywhere but here. Executives sat frozen, the glow of their tablets and laptops reflecting off tense faces. Even the hum of the city beyond the skyscraper seemed to fade, as if waiting for what would happen next. The little girl stepped further inside, her notebook pressed to her chest like armor. The click of her worn shoes echoed unnaturally loud against the marble. A senior vice president rose halfway from his seat, ready to summon security, but William lifted a hand, a sharp, imperious gesture that froze him mid-motion. "What is the meaning of this?" William's voice carried its usual authority, but the edge was brittle, as though sharpened against something he did not yet understand. "Who let her in?" The girl raised her chin, her gaze unflinching. "I did," she said simply. Her voice, though small, was steady enough to slice through the suffocating tension. "Because no one else would." A ripple of shock coursed through the room. Executives exchanged startled glances, each silently begging another to intervene, but no one dared. The billionaire titan who silenced senators and broke rivals with a single phone call had just been defied by a child. William's laugh came out harsh, brittle. "And what, little one, do you think you're doing here? This is a boardroom, not a classroom. Run along to your dolls before—" "Before what?" she interrupted. Her tone was curious, not frightened, like a student challenging a teacher who'd made a mistake. "Before you laugh again at someone who's asking you to be human." The words hit harder than he expected. Around the table, men and women froze, pens still in hand, breaths caught in throats. It was as if every suppressed thought they'd ever swallowed down had suddenly been spoken aloud through the mouth of a 7-year-old girl. For the first time in his career, William Harrington found himself without an immediate reply. His empire had been built on dominance, on the ability to silence dissent with a sneer or crush it with a single word. But this child's gaze, clear, unwavering, stripped his weapons from him. "Who are you?" he demanded, softer now, his confidence cracking like thin ice underfoot. The girl stepped closer, the notebook pressed tighter against her chest. "Someone you forgot," she said. The executive stiffened. Forgotten? The word was loaded, dangerous. William's jaw clenched as he tried to summon the smirk that had won him boardrooms and battles alike, but the smirk faltered. Something about her eyes made it impossible to dismiss her with mockery. "Mr. Harrington," whispered one of the directors, trying to break the spell. "Shall I call security?" "No." His answer was too quick, almost desperate. "Let her speak." The girl smiled faintly, though it wasn't the smile of a child asking for kindness. It was the smile of someone holding a secret that could unravel everything. She opened her notebook with deliberate slowness, pages filled with cramped handwriting, and the executives leaned forward despite themselves. "Do you want me to tell you in front of them?" she asked, her voice low but piercing. "Or when we're alone?" The tension snapped taut. The executive's curiosity was feverish now, a mixture of fear and fascination. Harrington's chest tightened as the fortress of dominance he had spent decades constructing began to tilt. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't an interruption. This was an intrusion, a deliberate one. The girl's next word would not just silence him, it would expose him. The boardroom air had turned electric, each second dragging heavier than the last. William Harrington, man of steel, titan of industry, master of silence, sat rigid at the head of the table, his empire balanced on the sharp edge of one girl's words. She had not moved from her spot, her small figure casting a shadow that seemed impossibly large against the gleaming wall of glass. Executives shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, unsure if they were witnessing the fall of a king or the birth of something none of them could yet name. The little girl closed her notebook with a snap, and the sound carried like a gunshot. "You laugh at people when they're desperate," she said softly. "But what if someone laughed at you when you were desperate?" Harrington stiffened. The question seemed innocent, almost childish, yet it pierced him in a way no adult's words ever had. Memories, buried, unwelcome, flashed like broken film reels behind his eyes. A young boy with empty pockets, a mother begging a landlord for one more week, a laugh at their expense that had burned into his soul. His knuckles whitened against the polished table. "How dare you?" he whispered, but his voice had lost its steel. The girl stepped closer, her small shoes tapping against marble, each step echoing like a countdown. "You built towers," she continued, "but you forgot the ground you came from. You forgot people like my mother, people who worked for you and believed you were human." A murmur rippled through the executives. The name of her mother hadn't been spoken yet, but the implication was a dagger hanging above the room. Harrington's empire was no stranger to whispers of discarded lives, ruined careers, broken promises. But never had those whispers materialized in flesh and blood, standing in front of him, daring to accuse him without trembling. "Enough!" Harrington surged to his feet, his chair screeching across the marble floor. "Security!" His voice was thunder, a command that had shattered rivals before. No one moved. Every executive stared, frozen not by fear of him, but by the magnetic pull of the girl's presence. She had become the storm in the room, and they, his loyal lieutenants, were no longer orbiting him but her. The girl tilted her head, unafraid. "You can call all the guards you want, but can they guard you from the truth?" Her words struck like a blade. Harrington's breath caught in his throat, his carefully crafted mask threatening to crack. He had faced senators, billionaires, enemies with armies of lawyers, and yet this child was dismantling him piece by piece with nothing but her voice. "Who sent you?" he demanded, but the question trembled at its edges. "Who put you up to this?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed her notebook on the glossy table, sliding it toward him with deliberate care. Its battered cover looked alien against the pristine surface, like a scar carved into flawless marble. "You already know," she said, her eyes steady and dark, locked onto his. "That's why you're afraid." The executives leaned forward, their curiosity and unease thickening the air. Harrington's hand twitched toward the notebook but hesitated, as if touching it might confirm the fear curdling in his chest. For years he had crushed threats by controlling the narrative, by silencing opposition before it could speak. But this was something raw, older, personal. The girl's next words came like a hammer against glass. "My mother's name was Anna." The name detonated in Harrington's mind. The executives around the table exchanged confused glances, but Harrington knew. He knew too well. Anna, a name he had buried, along with everything it meant, in the vault of his past. The color drained from his face, and for the first time in his reign as king of glass and steel, William Harrington looked like a man standing on a crumbling foundation. The girl watched him quietly, her presence steady, almost merciful, though her words were anything but. She said one day, "If I ever needed to be brave, I should find you and remind you who you really are." The room held its breath. The mighty millionaire, untouchable and untamed, now stood pale and speechless before a child who had weaponized nothing more than the truth. The boardroom was no longer a place of power. It had become a cage. The walls of glass, once symbols of William Harrington's dominion over the city, now seemed like windows into his shame. Outside, the skyline gleamed with late afternoon sunlight. Inside, the silence pressed down heavier than stone. Anna. The name rolled through Harrington's mind like thunder. He had not heard it spoken aloud in decades, not since the days before the skyscrapers, before the suits, before the empire. It was a name he had buried, along with the fragile boy he had once been. Yet here it was, resurrected by a child's lips. This child, with eyes that seemed to pierce every wall he had built. The executives around the table shifted uneasily. Some looked at their CEO with confusion, others with dawning suspicion. What did the name mean? Why did it shake the untouchable man to his core? The girl stood firm at the center of the storm, small hands folded neatly over her battered notebook. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "You laughed today when a man begged you not to fire him. You laughed when he asked how he'd feed his children. My mother said you'd forgotten what hunger feels like. She said one day I might have to remind you." A murmur rippled down the long table. No one dared speak, but in their eyes burned something Harrington had never seen in this room before. Doubt in him. "Leave," Harrington barked suddenly, his voice raw. "All of you, leave now." For the first time in his reign of power, his command was not met with immediate obedience. The executives glanced at one another, hesitated, then began shuffling their papers and gathering their devices with reluctant slowness. Their eyes, however, remained glued to the girl, to her notebook, to the fragile piece of evidence that seemed capable of toppling the man they had once feared. When the last of them slipped out, the heavy doors closed with a hush that seemed louder than any slam. The vast boardroom was empty now, empty except for William Harrington and the girl. He sat down heavily, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of the name Anna had broken him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice low, stripped of arrogance. The girl walked closer, her shoes tapping softly on the marble. She placed the notebook before him, its worn cover scarred by years of use. "It's not what I want," she said. "It's what she wanted, what she tried to tell you." Harrington stared at the notebook as if it were a bomb. His fingers hovered above it, trembling, unwilling to touch. Finally, he opened it. Inside were pages filled with letters, written in neat but fading handwriting. His chest constricted at the sight of that script. He knew it instantly. Anna's writing. Words leapt off the pages: forgive, hunger, promise, child. His eyes blurred, the lines bending into rivers of regret. This can't be," he whispered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was true. The girl had not come armed with threats or blackmail. She had come armed with memory, with proof. "You left her," the girl said, her voice no longer soft. It rang like a bell in the cavernous room. "You left her when she was most afraid. She told me about the promises you made, and how quickly you broke them when money became easier to love than people." Harrington's breath came shallow, ragged. He wanted to shout, to deny, to hurl accusations back at the child who stood like a judge before him, but the notebook silenced him. The words written within it were the echoes of a woman whose ghost had never left him. "Why come now?" he rasped. "Why after all these years?" The girl stepped closer, so close now that her presence filled the void his power had once occupied. Because she's gone, she whispered. And I promised her I'd find you. His head snapped up, the room tilted. Gone? The girl's eyes shimmered, but her voice was steady. My mother, Anna, died 6 months ago, and she made me promise that I would bring you this notebook, that I would show you who you used to be before you forgot. The words tore through him like a blade. He staggered back in his chair, his mind reeling. Anna was gone. The woman who had once been his anchor, his fire, his conscience, gone. And this child, this living reminder of her, had come to confront him with the truth. But before he could gather his thoughts, before he could ask the question that now burned inside him, the girl's final words in that moment shattered the air. She said you would know me by my eyes. Harrington froze. For the first time, he really looked at her, not at her clothes, not at her notebook, but at her eyes. And in their depths, he saw the undeniable reflection of his past, of Anna, of a truth he had tried to bury. The untouchable millionaire who had crushed empires and silenced adversaries now sat pale and shaking before a 7-year-old girl. And the question pounding in his chest was no longer, "Who are you?" but something far more terrifying. What have I done? The silence between them stretched until it seemed the skyscraper itself was holding its breath. The city lights glittered beyond the glass walls, but inside the boardroom, everything had narrowed to a trembling man and a child whose steady gaze felt centuries old. William Harrington, the titan who had reduced rivals to ash with a word, found himself unable to speak. His throat had closed, his hands shook as though the weight of an empire rested on them, and perhaps, for the first time, it did. The girl stepped closer, so close now that the glow of the city haloed around her small frame. "You're wondering who I am," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, but the stillness in the room magnified every syllable until it thundered in his ears. "You already know, but you're afraid to say it." Harrington's chest heaved. He wanted to deny her, to drive her out of his fortress of power and pride, but her eyes, the same stormy green as Anna's, held him captive. "I'm not here to ruin you," the girl continued, clutching her notebook. "I'm here because she made me promise. She said you needed to remember what you ran from, what you left behind." Harrington's voice cracked when he finally managed words. "What are you saying?" The girl's lips trembled for the first time, but she lifted her chin with courage far beyond her years. "She said I should tell you this when the moment was right, when you could no longer, or laugh at other people's pain, when you finally looked like a man who could feel again." The weight of her words pressed down on him, crushing the carefully constructed armor of decades. Harrington gripped the table's edge, nails biting into polished wood. "Tell me what?" The child opened her notebook and slid out a folded paper, yellowed at the edges, its ink smudged by time and tears. She laid it in front of him. "Her last letter," she whispered. With trembling fingers, Harrington unfolded it. The handwriting leapt from the page, Anna's handwriting. He felt the years collapse, the walls of glass dissolve, and suddenly he was 25 again, hungry, reckless, with nothing but ambition and the love of a woman who had believed in him. The letter was short. "William, if you are reading this, I am gone. I could not leave the world without giving you the truth. You have a daughter. Her name is Clara. She is the best part of me, and she is the piece of you that you left behind. If you still have any humanity left, you will find her, protect her, see her. She deserves to know her father." The words blurred as his vision clouded. He dropped the paper as though it burned him. His pulse roared in his ears. Slowly his gaze lifted to the girl. Clara. Her name hit him like a thunderclap. "You!" His voice broke. He swallowed hard, but the words still caught. "You're mine?" Clara nodded. Her small hands gripped the notebook tighter, as though bracing herself against his disbelief. "You're my father," she said, her voice calm but laced with the quiet ache of 7 years. "And all this time you never came for me." The boardroom seemed to tilt. Harrington's breath came ragged, his mind spinning through the years of letters he had ignored, the memories he had buried, the promises he had broken. He felt stripped bare, his empire of steel and glass crumbling around the single fragile truth. Of this child's existence. "You lived in Queens?" he asked hoarsely, the practical questions clawing through the chaos in his mind. How did you survive?" "Dorothy," Clara answered, her voice steady. "Mom's friend from the hospital, and Mrs. Alvarez, our neighbor, and sometimes strangers who cared more than you did." The words struck like whips. Harrington staggered, as though each syllable peeled back another layer of the man he pretended to be. He wanted to defend himself, to say he hadn't known, that he hadn't been given a chance. But the notebook, the letters, and above all the child's eyes told him the truth. He had known enough. He had simply chosen not to see. Clara took a step closer, her gaze unblinking. You measure everything in profit, but tell me, Mr. Harrington, what was the profit in forgetting us? What did you gain from leaving my mother to die alone? He flinched. He had built walls taller than skyscrapers, but her words scaled them with ease. For the first time in years, William Harrington felt small, cornered not by enemies with lawyers or guns, but by his own blood. I didn't know, he whispered, though even to his ears it sounded hollow. Yes you did, Clara interrupted, her voice cutting sharp and true. You knew enough to look away, and now you know me. The boardroom, the city, the empire, all of it receded until only she remained, a child with Anna's eyes and his name tethered invisibly to her future. The millionaire who had believed himself untouchable realized, in a single shattering moment, that he was not only touchable, he was already broken. The world seemed to tilt on its axis the moment William Harrington said the words out loud. This is Clara, my daughter. The boardroom, usually his arena of dominance, dissolved into chaos. Voices overlapped, sharp, frantic, accusatory. Some executives whispered into phones, already calculating stock dips and investor fall. A lout. Others simply stared wide-eyed as if their untouchable leader had finally revealed a mortal wound. But Harrington wasn't listening to them. His gaze remained locked on Clara, who stood small and still at his side, her notebook clutched to her chest. He had expected her to falter, to shrink under the storm of scrutiny. Instead, her chin lifted higher, as though she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. One board member, a hawk-faced man named Sloan, jabbed his finger at Harrington. Do you realize what you've just admitted? The press is already circling outside like vultures. If this story breaks unchecked, it won't just tarnish you. It'll drag us all down with you. The merger with Whitestone Pharmaceuticals will collapse overnight. Billions lost. Do you even care? Harrington turned, slowly, deliberately, his voice low but cutting. For years, I cared about nothing else. Numbers, mergers, acquisitions, the weight of zeros in a ledger. But tell me, Sloan, when has any of it ever looked back at me with eyes like hers? The words silenced even the most vicious critics. A murmur rippled through the room. Some executives exchanged uneasy glances. Others bowed their heads as if confronted with something raw and unfamiliar. Clara's hand slipped into his, tiny and fragile, but the grip carried more weight than any deal he had ever signed. Mom said you'd be afraid, she whispered, her voice only for him. Afraid of losing everything. Harrington felt the words strike like thunder in his chest. I've already lost everything that mattered, he murmured back, but I won't lose you. The doors at the far end of the boardroom suddenly burst open. A wave of cameras and microphones surged forward, security powerless against the press. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning across the polished mahogany table. Questions came like bullets. Mr. Harrington, is this true? Is this your illegitimate daughter? Will this affect your merger with Whitestone? Are you prepared to step down as CEO? Harrington had faced hostile takeovers, congressional hearings, even courtroom trials. He had always hidden behind legal teams and carefully scripted statements, but this time, there was no script. He rose, his grip tightening on Clara's hand. You want the truth? He thundered, his voice carrying with the authority that had once bent markets. The cameras fell silent, lenses focusing, microphones straining. This is Clara Harrington, my daughter, my blood, my mistake, and my redemption. The room froze. I built an empire, he continued, his words deliberate, heavy with the weight of confession. But I built it on sand because I abandoned the foundation that truly mattered: responsibility, compassion, family. Her mother believed in me when I was nothing. I repaid her faith with silence, and for that, I will spend the rest of my life making amends to this child. Reporters exchanged glances, their frenzy muted by the sheer audacity of his honesty. This wasn't the cold, untouchable titan they had known. This was a man stripping himself bare before the world. Mr. Harrington, one journalist called, are you saying you'll risk your company, your fortune for her? Harrington looked down at Clara, whose storm green eyes reflected Anna's ghost. He lifted her notebook for all to see, the worn cover, the scribbled letters inside, the evidence of a life he had ignored. I've already risked everything worth having by denying her existence. Now I will risk whatever remains to protect her. If the company falls, let it fall. If the markets collapse, so be it. My empire begins and ends with this child. Gasps rippled through the press. The executives shifted uncomfortably, calculating the cost of such defiance. But Clara's small smile, trembling but real, was the only approval Harrington needed. From the corner of the room, Sloane sneered. "You've gone mad. You'll destroy everything we've built." Harrington turned, his voice colder than ice. "We built nothing. I built it, brick by brick, soul by soul, and if I choose to tear it down for her, I will. You may leave if your loyalty lies only with profits, but as of this moment, Anderson Global will not be remembered for mergers or margins. It will be remembered for something greater: truth." The press surged forward again, questions spilling over one another, but Harrington didn't flinch. He drew Clara closer, his arm protective, his chest rising with a strange, fierce pride. "Mom said you'd only be free when you stopped running," Clara whispered, her words almost lost in the chaos. Harrington bent his head toward her, his voice hoarse. "Then I am free at last." The cameras captured everything: the fall of a titan, the rise of a father, and in that crucible of light and judgment, William Harrington discovered the one shocking truth, more powerful than money, more terrifying than failure, more lasting than fame. The girl who had come to silence him had instead given him back his voice.